My name is Matt Harris. I'm the United States Marshal for the District of Utah. Here we have John Huber, the United States Attorney, Chief Ken Valentine with West Jordan Police Department, Lieutenant Courtney Ryan with Weber County, and we have Chief Kyle Whitehead with St. George Police Department. So we'll do that in order, and I'll say a few words. What I'll do is I'll turn it over to John, I'll turn it over to Chief Whitehead, and then we'll turn it over to Chief Valentine, and then Lieutenant Ryan. So today we're here to announce what we believe to be the largest, or one of the largest, sex offender coordinated efforts in state history. In coordination with 11 agencies statewide, touching nearly every corner of the state, from St. George down to Washington County, up to Weber and parts of Cache, into Uinta County and out to Vernal, and here on the Wasatch Front. For 2 straight weeks, on days, on nights, and weekends, local police officers went door to door, checking on the registration status of sex offenders to ensure they were complying with state registration requirements with the purpose of keeping our children safe. This is a big deal, and it's so much of a big deal that Chief Whitehead drove the 4 hours today to be here for this press conference. That's how big of a deal it is. As the United States Marshal, part of my job and responsibilities are to develop relationships with our state and local partners, but also to utilize the muscle of the federal government and the Department of Justice, and to help make our communities safe. Safe from violent fugitives, and safe from child sex predators. In fact, in the last 18 months, our task force here with the Marshal Service has arrested approximately 125 fugitives statewide. Under the Adam Walsh Act, Congress gave the United States Marshal Service full authority to lead and to be the lead federal investigative agency to help state and local agencies investigate folks who don't register properly as sex offenders. And that's why we're here today. So our operation has 2 parts. All right? The first part I just spoke about, it's a sex offender compliance piece, where officers went out and checked the registration status statewide. The other part is our fugitive operation team, where we went out and looked for folks with warrants who were active sex offenders. So the way the operation worked was that our office worked closely with each participating agency to identify the number of sex offenders in each jurisdiction. The goal was to go door to door and confirm that each offender was registered as the law required. Essentially, local agencies sought to check the compliance status of about 1,000 of Utah's registered 8,000 sex offenders. The funding was provided for the operation by the United States Marshal Service Sex Offenders Branch to help cover the cost of overtime, travel, and workload. The logistics and the manpower and the time that it takes to pull off an operation of this size is remarkable. And while the results are not final, they are remarkable. During the 2-week period, local officers checked the registration status of over 700 offenders. We estimate that between 18 to 20% of those offenders were non-compliant. That means about 1/5 of sex offenders statewide are in violation. Or on the other side, that means that 80%, roughly, are in compliance. Examples of those sex offenders who failed to register include offenders who committed rape against small children, parole fugitives, and offenders who were living in homes with small children that were not supposed to. As a result of our compliance operation, 33 offenders are being screened for prosecution or were arrested during this compliance operation. But during the same period, our task force lasered in on offenders who were committing rape against children, parole fugitives, and offenders. And we went to those departments and our partners, and we said, give us your outstanding warrants. Let us work those warrants, and let us go after the worst folks in our community. And we put a premium on violators who committed sexual offenses against children. As part of the piece of this operation, the United States Marshal Service and local officers arrested 8 fugitives for sex crimes. Therefore, at the end of this operation, we estimate, at a minimum, 42 offenders will have been charged with additional crimes for sex offenses. Examples include Scott Swift, 42, of Salt Lake, who was wanted for a warrant related to unlawful sexual activity of a minor. Alan Shepard in West Jordan, who was wanted for 3 counts of rape of a child. Adam Liu, 45, of Salt Lake City, for failure to register as a sex offender after being charged with unlawful enticement of a minor. And Rudolph Jesus Trevino, who was arrested just a few weeks ago. And we arrested him on a parole violation related to a sexual offense. I can't underestimate the importance of this operation. An operation like this sends a message to sex offenders that law enforcement is watching, and if you don't register and you don't pay attention to the law, we're coming to get you. But it also gives comfort to the moms and dads out there, knowing that during the start of the school year, and even when some in our nation are looking down on our profession, that we continue to protect and serve, and we will be here to keep your children safe, because there is nothing more important, and there is no mission that we'd rather be a part of. One final thing before I close and turn it over to our U.S. Attorney. Because of the leadership of these men right here and their willingness to support this operation, this community and this community and this state is a heck of a lot safer than it was 2 weeks ago. And thank you for being here today. John?
So back in 1981 in Florida, a little boy and his mother went on a shopping trip to Sears, pick up some things, look around. And you think about your own growing up and the habits that you had. The little boy went to the toy section, and mom went to look for some items for home. And they got separated. That was the last they saw each other. The little boy named Adam Walsh was abducted and murdered in a gruesome way. His murder essentially went unsolved, although as the years passed, focused in on the suspected killer, who was a serial murderer. We know that Adam Walsh's father became very well known as perhaps the most famous child crime advocate and crime advocate in our nation, John Walsh. It was 25 years later, in 2006, that the Adam Walsh Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Bush. It really changed things for the safety of our communities and the safety of our homes, the safety of our children. That's the law that we're talking about today. The law that came from the Adam Walsh Act that established a nationwide database and strict requirements for sex offenders and child sex offenders to register. When we say register, we're talking about they need to notify the appropriate government authority that where they live, what they drive, where they work, where they go to school, everything. And they need to keep that current. That's the law that we're talking about enforcing with this big operation that the United States Marshal described. These are cases against convicted sex offenders. So it's not suspects in the sense that they have already been convicted of myriad crimes that the Marshal described, from child rape, child exploitation, child pornography. It runs the gambit. What this law then focuses on is those who purposefully try to leave the grid, to live off the radar, even though the law of the land requires them to register where they live and who they are and who they're dealing with. Simply put, people in this category, they don't have a choice any longer. They can't say, I want to live away from the government and out of their purview. If a child predator goes off the grid, we will track them down and prosecute them. We track and monitor child sex offenders. The law extends this protection since 2006. The law extends this protection once they re-enter society. We know that all but the very few of convicted offenders will get out of jail at some point. They'll leave prison and they'll re-enter society. That will happen to the vast majority of them. This law extends the protection we had when they were in custody to the time that they are in the community living with us. That law extends protection to our communities, our neighborhoods, and to our homes. During my tenure as the United States Attorney, we have prosecuted over 30 of these cases. May not sound like a lot, but these are the most serious cases that Utah has to offer of sex offenders, child sex offenders who have failed to register and intentionally left the grid to avoid our purview and our monitoring. Most of our targets that we have prosecuted in Utah for this federal offense come from other states. They left the state where perhaps they were convicted and lived for a long period of time. They came to Utah to hide. Our greatest concern, and it's a serious and legitimate concern, is that these offenders stalk our children. That's the greatest fear, and it's a real fear. Not everyone recidivates. Not everyone goes back to the crime for which we're most concerned, but way too many of them do for us to sit idly by. So we ask a question, and I suggest that you do ask the question, why? Why would the United States Marshal and these police departments and sheriff's offices go to such lengths for such an extensive and an expensive law enforcement operation, where they make sacrifices of convenience, of time away from their family? Their family makes sacrifices as these officers leave to go serve at odd hours, on hot days, knocking on doors and looking for people to confirm that they're in compliance with the law. Why? Why do they do it? They do it for our children. These law enforcement officers do it for our children. There's no glory on a hot, sweaty afternoon knocking on a door in St. George, Utah to make sure a sex offender is doing what he should do. There's no glory in that. They do it to protect our children and to keep our homes and neighborhoods safe. So one final note, and maybe you're already predicting where I'm going with this. This extensive, expensive operation brings into focus how ludicrous the demands and chants of the activists are. This type of operation shows how ridiculous the demands are to defund the police, to defund law enforcement. Who will protect our children in such a bizarre counter-universe? We commend our law enforcement today for the job that they've done, to find 30 or more people who are worthy of screening for prosecution in state and federal court, because they went off the grid intentionally to hide from their past as sexual predators and to perhaps, hopefully not, stalk our children again. Thanks.
Good afternoon. The St. George Police Department recently participated in a statewide sex offender compliance operation. Our department attempted to visit the residence of each individual on the sex offender registry within our city limits. Most were in compliance. Some of the out-of-compliance issues that were discovered included outdated phone numbers, vehicles, and jobs. Here are some of the numbers in our community regarding the operation we participated in. We had 11 of our detectives participate in these compliance checks. A total of 137 hours were spent. The Number of sex offenders that were checked in our community, 157. Non-compliant violations out of those 157 were 11. However, due to pandemic restrictions and some other issues, there were no custody arrests made. Most of those will be handled through the complaint process into the appropriate court. And then we did have 15 non-verified contacts, which means we will have to follow up at a later date. As a police department, we value our relationship with the U.S. Marshals Service, with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we appreciate their support. And I would just like to agree with what Attorney Huber has said, that we do this for the children. We realize that it's not always exciting work, but it's necessary work. And I appreciate this opportunity to be able to speak today.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Wallenstein. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of West Jordan. Some of the names on the list that Marshal Harris referred to were familiar to me. And in fact, a few of those names of the 30 that Mr. Huber referenced were familiar to me because I formerly oversaw the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and have some intimate knowledge, not just of the offenders, but of the victims in these cases. And I wish to express to you that our focus at the West Jordan Police Department, as well as my colleagues here, was on making sure that we protected the victims. Now, we send people to prison for these heinous sex crimes against children. But as Mr. Huber said, they don't always stay there. There is a path outward. And that path can involve rehabilitation. Let me tell you some of the experiences that my detectives shared with me after conducting this 2-week intensive operation. Interestingly, on the hottest days, some of the offenders invited our detectives in for a cool drink and invited them into their home. One offender in particular, his quote was reported back to me saying, "The fact that you come here to check on me, the fact that you come to find out if I'm still living where I'm supposed to be living, the fact that you come into my home and take a look at the conditions and the things that I'm doing, that helps keep me straight." In other words, this offender recognized that the work that was done in this effort, and for us it's an ongoing effort in our city throughout the year, helps actively protect the children in the community and protect this offender from reoffending. We understand there's a path to rehabilitation. And in the world of the sex offender, that path involves this: trust, but verify. And what we've had now over the last couple of weeks is a very intensive operation directed at verification, making sure that those folks who say they're on the path to rehabilitation are doing the things that we expect as a society and as a legal system to actually rehabilitate themselves. I'm grateful to the Marshals Service. The opportunity that he provided through some additional funding from my department allowed us to undertake a very intensive operation, visiting over 100 homes in our community and contacting over 130 sex offenders in our community. Most of them were compliant. Most of them were doing what they're supposed to be doing. A few were not. We're dealing with them. One's taking an express train back to prison. Because trust but verify also means trust and hold accountable. Thank you.
I'm Lieutenant Courtney Ryan with Weber County Sheriff's Office. On behalf of Sheriff Ryan Arbon, I just want to express our gratitude for the U.S. Attorney's Office and the U.S. Marshal's Office for undertaking this monumental task of putting this detail together. We were more than happy to participate in it and be a part of this experience. I spent several years as a child welfare investigator investigating these individuals who have committed offenses against children, and there was nothing more upsetting yet gratifying for myself as a detective and as a law enforcement officer than to be able to help a child in a bad situation and put somebody in prison who offends against children. There is no greater person on this earth than a child, and they are very vulnerable, and unfortunately we have very evil people that are waiting for the opportunity to take advantage of these small children in our communities and in our homes. So throughout this process, the Weber County Sheriff's Office Investigations Bureau conducted 62 home checks. We were able to verify with 50 of those, and following up with a couple more over the next couple of weeks to make sure that they're in compliance. We did make contact either physically or by phone, and with all 62 of our offenders in our area. There just needs to be some follow-up and some in-person contacts with a couple of them. There are some compliance issues that we're addressing as well, and we'll continue to follow up with those. But again, we just want to thank the U.S. Marshal's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office and all the law enforcement agencies in the state of Utah that takes great pride in keeping our children safe and moving forward with this detail. So thank you.
Just one other note. You'll see in the press release there's a statement from Uinta County Sheriff Steve Labram. Sheriff Labram out in Uinta wanted to be here today, but he couldn't. But there's a statement on the record from him, and just to show, again, how widespread this operation was.